All right. Hello, everyone. You are listening to the Minding Mind podcast, where we live life with ease, connection, and permission to just be. I'm your host, Evelyn LeVasseur, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I get to sit down with a special guest and talk about an extremely important topic. I'm going to introduce you to Markella Kaplani, and we're going to talk all about how our identity shifts in motherhood. And I cannot wait for you to hear more about this. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit more about Markella. Markella offers guidance to parents and couples navigating the ever-changing landscape of parenthood and relationship dynamics. With a background in clinical and counseling psychology and an unwavering passion for fostering confidence, communication, and connection in all members of the family system, Markella is not just a seasoned psychologist, but also a dedicated parenthood and relationship coach. She is known for her insightful approach to the shifts in identity that come with parenthood and how it affects how a person relates to themselves, their partner, and to their children. Markella is devoted to validating and normalizing the roller coaster of emotions involved in parenthood by helping parents and couples get to self-awareness and self-compassion through her social media, her blog, her intimate newsletter, and soon enough, I'm told, her very own podcast. On a more personal level, Markella is a mother of one, married to a man who she's been with for 17 years, and a restless soul who had to reconcile her own multi-passionate nature with the demands of parenthood. Markella, welcome to the show.
Hi, be here. Thank you for having me.
So glad to be able to talk because I feel like before we even get into it all, I feel like there is something so beautiful about becoming a mother, but also difficult because there are feelings that come to you that are just not normalized in conversation. So I cannot wait to get into that. Let's start with you telling us a little bit more about you and what lights you up about this work.
Okay, so about me, I am a person that has, like you mentioned, been quite multi-passionate is the one thing that I would put in the forefront. And the reason why I'm using this out of the many things that make up who we are is that this is part of what led me to my journey into what it is that I do and why it lights me up. Because as a person that had always been doing a lot of things, a go-getter and someone who had been involved, like I would work so many hours and then I would still go out with friends and then I would still have a million hobbies and restless basically. And a part of me really believed that motherhood would basically take away the need for all these things. Not that I wanted it to, but I felt like I was walking into motherhood knowing that I won't be able to do all of the things that I used to do. Of course, I was still quite oblivious to how it was going to be, right? You never really know until you get into it. But I knew that I definitely couldn't be living in the fast pace that I was living and doing all of these things that I was doing. But I had, I guess it was a wish or an expectation that I would no longer need all these things as much, that motherhood would fulfill this. By month 6, I couldn't take it any longer. I created a blog for mothers at that point. Then by month 8 or 9 of my son's life, I started doing cement creations. I had to do something. I realized that it wasn't going away basically. And I was very upset with myself, honestly, that it didn't go away. And it was so difficult for me to do these things. I was sleepless, and the sleeplessness was really affecting me. I think it's the thing that affected me the most in motherhood personally. I've seen other people that deal with it a little bit better, although, objectively, sleep has an impact on so many levels.
Mhm.
Psychological, we don't talk about that enough. Physiological, hormonal. But for me, like it really hit me on all levels. And yet, my need to do things, my restlessness hadn't gone away.
Mm.
And I would prefer instead of napping, which was very rare, to just go out in the in the balcony in the freezing cold to do some cement creation just to feel like my old self again. And then I realized that as a person, one thing that I never really felt very much was shame and guilt. And in becoming a mother, I actually felt that so much.
Mm.
And part of it was like, why do I need this so much? And I felt guilty for doing it. I couldn't take the full pleasure of doing it because I felt, why do I need it so much? Why can't I be like other people who are just satisfied, or that was my impression,
Do you feel
with
like you had
motherhood?
this, do you feel like you had an idea in your mind that becoming a mother would be all of your identity now, as in like that was your fulfillment?
I really didn't think of motherhood as an identity shift the way that I know now that it
Okay.
is. I thought it was just another role. And I had historically been quite good, and I don't know if that's a good thing. I'm not boasting here. I was historically quite good at any role that I had taken up until motherhood. And so I think I had the misconception in my head. Like I thought, okay, 1 + 1 = 2. So I'm going to take on another role, and I've taken on so many, and I've found a way to make it work. So this is going to work as well. It really looked like it. And it didn't. It wasn't working for me. I wasn't able to juggle it. I wasn't able to fit it in with all of the parts of me that wanted to still shine. It felt like a lot of parts of me had to dim their light
Mm.
in order for me to be the mother that I wanted to be. And so a part of me was really proud of how I was showing up as a mom, and then other parts of me were really upset. They were really not fulfilled, not satisfied with the way that things were going, and I didn't know how to reconcile all of this.
I feel like what I'm hearing you say is that your journey was literally about becoming the best of both worlds, a mother and a fulfilled individual. What is that even? Where did you even start like addressing that that's what you even wanted? And what steps does somebody take to get to be both?
I don't know that you get to be both. And so this is kind of what
Mm.
started off the journey for me, was that deep sadness, but I didn't have postpartum depression. And so I saw this binary of, you're either joyous in motherhood, or you have some kind of a diagnosed clinical, some kind of clinical diagnosis. So you could be, you could have postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, and then there's other things. And I didn't fit that category, but I definitely didn't fit the joyous and motherhood category either. There were definitely lots of joys and moments and days, and I couldn't just say I'm joyful in motherhood. So I was kind of like in a gray zone that nobody really talked about. Even recently, I spoke to a midwife that runs a center here where I live for mothers to help them in the first year of motherhood. And to my dismay, she really had this very binary vision and understanding of, they're either happy in motherhood, or they're not, or they're
Okay.
depressed. And so for me, I started researching. Like, I was sure I didn't fit the criteria of being depressed. But at the same time, I was alarmed because I also felt like, even though I didn't think that, it really triggered me. I thought, oh my gosh, I never realized, but I guess it was societally ingrained in me that I'm supposed to be joyous. And though I knew, like, from my work from before becoming a mother myself, I was working with parents, and I thought it was totally normal for them not to be joyful all the time. And when it came to me, I felt like, yeah, but shouldn't I be? What's up? Like, this is the honeymoon. Sorry, this is the honeymoon phase with the baby, right? You're supposed to be very joyous. So then I started researching, and I found that what happens is we expect that motherhood will be another role, but what it really is an entire identity shift. And what that actually means is we don't get to be the old self along with the new self. What that means is you change. There is no going back to normal. There is a new normal, and you can make the best of it. And this new normal can actually be a new version of you that's more developed.
Mhm.
However, for that to happen, you have to realize that this is part of the process. You have to have the time and acceptance to work on grieving your old self, to not feel shameful for that because that blocks the process, to be able to grieve those parts of you that no longer shine as much. And then at that point, what happens is you get to be this new person. And all what the difference is between a role and an identity is that in a role, it's basically an add-on. I get to be when I'm at work, I'm a professional. When I'm home, I can shut that down if I want to. Some people don't, but I can if I want to. But with an identity shift, it's basically something that follows me around and it affects every area of my life. So it affects how I show up at work. It affects how I show up as a daughter, as a wife, as anything. And that is the thing that I think is difficult for us to realize. It definitely was for me because we expect that, yeah, but my relationship shouldn't be affected. We expect that if I wanted to go back to work, then why am I at work and feeling guilty that I'm back at work? And
Mhm.
when I'm with my baby, why am I feeling guilty that I didn't finish all the work? So
Mhm.
why is this guilt following me around all the time?
Yeah.
And that's how it started for me. Kind of, I started questioning
Mhm.
what is happening.
Yeah. I think what came up for me when you were talking was that when I became a mother, and my road to motherhood was not easy. So when I actually had a successful pregnancy and gave birth to my first daughter, I literally became completely like all encompassed in being a mom. And yes, I was full of gratitude. And yes, I was full of relief because a part of me didn't believe I would be a mother. But also, I recognized much later that it was easy for me to completely wrap myself in motherhood because I was so disconnected from the woman, the individual before motherhood. It was easier to focus all my energy on motherhood than to acknowledge why I was so dissatisfied with myself prior to. So that was like what came up for me when you were talking. But I'm curious to know when you were feeling these things and feeling like the guilt and you have all these, those are pretty strong feelings following you around. Were you able to share that discontent with your husband?
Yes. With my husband, I was able to share it. I don't know that he fully understood, but mind you, he's also a psychologist. And so there is some kind of, and he also works in a clinic with postnatal women. So there is more understanding there,
Mhm.
right? But even so, there were times that I felt like he couldn't get the experience 100%
Mhm.
as much as he tried. And honestly, now that I work with couples, I see that there is a limit to how much we can get into the other person's situation. There is a different way of thinking. There is a different experience objectively of what each person is going through. And sometimes, in order to upkeep the relationship within this storm, if you find yourself in it, it is enough to just hear the person out
Mhm.
and to even say it out loud. I don't get your experience. I can't feel what you feel, but I hear you. And that is more than enough. And it's usually not what we get. It's also kind of how the male brain is wired. Even if you talk about it a lot of times, the husband will respond with trying to find a solution.
Yeah.
That is the way that they show that they care.
Mhm.
And so for us women who want to be heard and we want the emotion validated first, we feel like we're not supposed to be feeling this way, and that's why he's giving me a solution. And
Mm.
so this starts to create a rift between husband and wife, where the husband starts to feel like she doesn't appreciate anything that I say anymore. She doesn't think that anything I try to do or say to help her is valuable. So I no longer feel admired, which is like the worst thing you could do to a man,
Yeah.
right? And then the wife, the mother, is feeling like he doesn't hear me. He thinks that what I'm feeling is not okay. And it's I'm right about this. She feels very right in that position because the first thing that he does is try to change how she feels, right? And they're coming from completely different places, but they're speaking completely different languages.
Mhm.
And what happens and what I do when I work with couples is basically the first step is really understanding this concept of matrescence, this transition. and that it's normal to feel this way, and that it's okay to sit in that emotion.
Mm.
And it's becoming more popularized, but there is now the concept of patrescence, so for fathers, because their
Markella, can
identity
you,
starts to change too.
I apologize for interrupting. Can you explain the matrescence and putrescence? Because prior to meeting you, I had never heard that term before.
Yeah, so matrescence is a term that was first coined by Dana Raphael in 1970, but now
Mhm.
it's becoming more popularized. And basically, it is purposely, it sounds like adolescence, because it is a very big transition in a person's life. In adolescence, there are the hormones and the physical changes and so many things. In a similar regard, in matrescence, basically from preconception, so even when we start to think about having a baby, we begin to slowly change. So even in thinking about having a baby, my priorities might change. I might already start to, let's say, drink less because I think that it's going to help me conceive more easily. That's just an example.
Yep.
And so our identity begins to shift. It's basically a rite of passage into motherhood. That's what matrescence is. And while in adolescence, there's a beginning and an ending, matrescence is actually ongoing because with every developmental shift that our child or children go through, our identity shifts. So, for instance, it's not just a lot of people think that matrescence is kind of like the fourth trimester or the first postnatal year. But what it really is ongoing because when children, for example, enter their adolescent years, they need us way less. And then what happens? So I have a lot of people come in, excuse me, it's allergy season for me.
Yeah.
I have a lot of people come in either individually or as couples. And what they say is, for so long, I had been engrossed in my identity as mother, father. And so, in a couple that came recently said, we were great as partners in parenting. We didn't even realize there's something wrong. And now all of our children, because they had a few, all of them have moved into preteens and teens by now, and they need us way less. And we actually get to spend time together as a couple, and we don't know who we are to
Mm.
each other anymore. And so that is part of matrescence and putrescence. I've changed, you've changed. And have we met along the way? Have we interacted along the way? Have we talked about these changes? And we've had to change again and again. And so this is in individual terms, but even at work. So for me, for instance, when my son was born, I had to cut down completely. I didn't work at all for the first 6 months. And then when I returned, I worked way fewer hours. And now that he's gone to school, I don't work afternoons and I've had to adjust my work schedule to work either at nighttime when he sleeps and in the mornings. Right. So these are changes that keep on happening as he goes into other stages. And so that is what matrescence is. It's all these changes and shifts that happen to our identity. And the same thing with putrescence, but for fathers. In matrescence and putrescence, we'll see that even the brain changes.
Mm.
So there are changes in the brain. For mothers, it's permanent. For fathers, it tends to be more temporary. And it tends to happen only if the father gets to be more involved, because you will get some maternal leave from work, but in most countries, fathers don't get so much leave or at all. And so they don't get to be there at the first stages where this critical shift in the brain happens.
Mm.
But it's even found in the brain biologically. We are wired differently after we become parents. We start to think in we more than we think in I, for instance.
That is super interesting. Super interesting. Now, is that wiring in the brain? Does that impact the parent's ability to connect with the baby?
Yes, the reason for this wiring is there because you want to be able to connect with the baby. So you think much more in terms of how does what I do affect this baby and how does what I do affect the world? And the reason why this happens is because we are basically ensuring survival for this baby when we want to know that when I go, this world is a better place for my child to live in.
Mhm.
And this is part of how our brain shifts in order to accommodate for that.
Wow. Wow, that is powerful. So when clients or couples or even individuals come to you, what does the work look like? Is it a matter of have they reached a point of, discontent? Are they coming to you because they're uncomfortable and don't know where to start? Are they looking for a change? Are they just looking for some support? What does their journey look like? And kind of like, how do you help them work through it?
So, to be fully transparent, if we talk about mothers, coming to me involves getting to a very, very low point. Otherwise, they actually feel a lot of guilt and shame to seek support. So, even though they need the support, and even though it's very valid and legitimate that they need the support, it's actually the way that society treats mothers who seem to not be happy in motherhood is so invalidating that it presents an obstacle to seeking help, right? So if I am clinically depressed, then that excuses needing the help and needing the medication. But if I'm not clinically depressed, then what's wrong with me? Don't
Yeah.
I want this baby? I wanted this baby. So, what did you expect? These are things that people say so easily to one another. And so for a lot of mothers, unfortunately, this stands in the way of coming before they are burnt out. Usually the journey involves getting to a point where they're burnt out and they feel like they're reaching depression because we don't get there's a misconception that postnatal depression either happens to you right after you give birth where the hormones are going up and down. And so that is usually where it happens because there's truly a sudden shift in the hormonal levels. But a lot of times it has been recorded that postnatal depression can happen a year after you've had the
Wow.
baby. So a lot of times the journey for women is they are reaching the point where they feel like they may be getting depressed, and this is where they'll get in touch. It happens sooner when the marriage is in crisis. So usually the husband will contact me very concerned about his wife and about how she has changed and now hates him. If you
Mm,
Google, why does my wife hate me after the baby, after having children, it actually is a very searched phrase,
wow.
phrase. It's very interesting. And so then mothers feel like it's okay to do it because here's the thing. We have connected motherhood to self-sacrifice, and while we may think that we have progressed, we really haven't. Women are thought of as being valuable if they sacrifice themselves. And especially when it comes to motherhood, we are supposed to self-sacrifice. And so when we are not feeling that great in motherhood, seeking therapy feels indulgent.
Yeah.
It feels like, no, this is money I could save for the college education for this baby. Why am I putting it on myself? I should be fine. I'll get over it. I'll power through. I hear this so often. I'll power through. It's okay. That's what I'm supposed to do. And so that is what makes it quite difficult. The foundation, the way that society has raised us doesn't allow us very easily to get to the point where we say, okay, I need some support. And this support doesn't have to be therapy necessarily. It doesn't have to be coaching. It could also be in the sense of creating a village for ourselves with other women, talking about what is happening to me, because we don't even do that. We're very afraid to tell other women around us. And we usually start with the sentence, we prelude with, I love my baby, but we have to say that. We feel like we have to say it because if we start with, I am so frustrated today, then, oh my God, she's such a bad mother.
Yeah. Yeah. And you kind of wear this idea that if I say that I'm showing I'm not grateful and I'm showing that I'm selfish. And you actually kind of start labeling yourself as not a good mom because you have all these doubts about what you're thinking or feeling and then making yourself feel horrible. But the truth is, like, you literally have been programmed to believe that your value comes from your exhaustion.
Yes. empowering through that exhaustion.
Yeah.
And this is a general thing in our society. We have this concept in our minds that we only get one emotion.
Yeah.
So if you're happy, you're happy. But a lot of times it could be happy, but it could be really anxious at the
Mhm.
same time with what it is that I'm doing. I'm very happy that I'm trying this new thing, but I'm also anxious because it's the first time I'm doing it. These are two emotions that can coexist and it's fine. But we haven't been taught that. And so when I am a mom and I'm super grateful and I adore my child, but at the same time, I'm uneasy. I want to do other things. But then again, I want to be with my baby 24/7. I'm having this internal fight within myself already. And then how do I even express that to you so that you can understand? So that
Mhm.
you don't label me as a mom that doesn't care because I'm telling you I want to do my hobbies. But I'm struggling internally myself with this because I don't accept that these two can coexist. There
Yeah.
are many contradictions in parenthood.
Mhm.
And that's what creates a lot of shame and guilt for both parents, not just mothers, for fathers as well.
Mhm. I love that you're just literally in speaking those words out loud, you're creating this sense of safety in women and knowing that, every feeling that we have is valid and every feeling could have a counter feeling that's completely opposite and confusing, but both are real and both are valid. And the truth is that both are temporary, right? Like you can be very happy right now and stressed later on this afternoon, but both of those feelings don't negate the fact that you are still grateful for the life that you created. So I love that you are just creating this sense of safety in knowing that whatever it is you're feeling, whatever it is valid. And none of it speaks to your character.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad that comes across. That is my whole goal with what I do is to validate that. I think it really begins from feeling understood and feeling like there's nothing wrong with us.
Mhm.
Then that's where the healing really begins.
Yeah, that's beautiful. How do you help couples, I guess, work through their journey individually, but also help each other simultaneously? And is that even possible? Okay, so my question is, are you even able to support the couple as individuals in this journey, but also have them able to support each other simultaneously? Is that like, is that too an ideal way of thinking?
Well, I'm not sure I completely understand your question, so correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm going on the wrong path. But my main service and the way that I work with couples actually tries to help with that exact part. So I actually work with couples, I see them together for the first week. And then the second week, I actually see them individually. I see each one of them separately. And so we get to work on their own changing identity and on things that affect them and things that come with them, right? Because we're not a clean slate. When we enter motherhood or fatherhood, we are carrying our own traumas, whether tiny or big. And these may be known to our partner, they may not. We may think we have resolved them, but they come up, they get triggered again because trauma is never really 100% resolved. It's sitting there, and if I've been diligent and I've done a lot of work on my trauma, it will get triggered, but I'll know, I'll be aware when it's triggered, I'll be aware when it's there, and I'll know how to cope with it, and I'll be in a better place, right? And so I help each individual within the couple. So when they show up as a couple, I still see them individually and together and then individually again. So we have the system where we touch base with ourselves individually and then we touch base together.
I
And
love
we start to create this space where I feel safe to express certain things to you. And how do I bring this up in the couple session and for both of them? And it gives me a better understanding of what's happening in the background as well,
I love that.
so that I can help them.
I mean, I know that just from this one conversation, I can see how you shift the mindset of the mother in allowing herself to just see all of who she is rather than who she thinks she should be. Are you able to, or do you see that the partner is able to do the same, kind of release these expectations of what a mother should be or what a father should be, and start to, I guess, hold space and compassion and acknowledge for who they actually are.
They do. They do. The results are positive, actually. And honestly, at the beginning of all of this, I didn't believe that it was very possible to do that. Knowing it's very difficult to put ourselves in another person's situation. And the truth is, we can't. So this is the one thing that did go according to my expectations. So the husband will not be as able to get into the psychology of motherhood and really understand what's going on there, but they are able to release the expectations as they start to listen and as they start to understand how their judgment, so they don't realize that they're judging, but as they start to realize that this is judgment and that what's happening there is not helpful, and as they start to have a more critical look around, which is something that we all do. We really assume that everybody's doing well. We assume that everybody else is following this other path that we just haven't been able to succeed in. And when they start to really have a critical look at, you're missing information. Do you really know that your friend's wife is coping better? Do you realize that she's got her mother-in-law and her mother basically living in the house? Do you guys have that support? So when you start to reframe both practically and on an emotional, on a deeper level, you do see change. And I see a lot of effort being made to understand.
I love that. I think it's just very hopeful for people that are struggling in this situation. Yeah, it just feels very hopeful. It feels like a very positive, we hear so much about like just stress in marriage and stress in relationships and very high divorce rates and a lot of guilt and a lot of shame and a lot of judgment and pointing fingers. And I love that you're kind of shedding light to the idea that we just need to acknowledge that our experiences are very real and very different, and there's still a common ground in there for us.
Yeah, but it does take hard work.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
where it becomes very difficult is that when we enter these conversations in terms of couples, it's really important to look within and see how we are contributing to the situation, which is the hardest part.
Yeah.
And so that's where it gets difficult, and that's what will determine whether things will go successfully or they will start to derail.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we come into this expecting that the partner will understand, right? So the way that I said it before, oh yeah, so now my husband explained to him. So I've had this happen. Like I was working with a mother and we were doing really well. She started understanding herself better and she started understanding that it's all normal. But then she felt like her husband didn't get her and that this was causing friction. And so she brought him in, and it was basically tell him what it's like, help
Mm.
him understand me. But she didn't understand that there was a dynamic there coming from her side. So even though everything she was feeling was valid, and even though she wasn't being understood, and again, it was legitimate that she was upset and she was unhappy in their interactions, not in the entire marriage, but in their interactions, it was still very difficult for her at that point when they got together in therapy to be able to see how certain things that she did not help him understand her.
Understood.
She had the expectation that he should be able
Mhm.
to understand certain things, that, oh, doesn't he see how difficult it is on the days that he is home? Doesn't he realize that I have this 24/7, as an example? So this expectation is that if you love me, this is the way deeper layer. If you love me, then you should know that this is difficult. You should think deeper and understand. The fact that you don't, and I have to spell it out for you, is embarrassing because it makes me feel that you don't love me enough to do it yourself. I'm not valuable enough. And so then that's where the difficulty lies, to start to break apart where this comes from. And
Mhm.
this usually stems from childhood. Why do I feel like the fact that I have to tell you how I feel is means that you don't love me enough?
Right. That is so real. That is so real. Because I hear it all the time. Why should I have to tell him that? Why should I have to? Why should I have to explain? And, I hear women say often, like, it's common sense. How does he not get it? And it is common to you, but common sense is also individual, right? Ironic. Markella, thank you I just want to thank you for, having such an important conversation and making women and men equally feel just comfortable in the fact that their journey is very personal, very individual, and worthy of being understood, regardless of where they're at. And that no matter what it is in your relationship that you're dealing with, compassion is always going to be a key factor in moving forward. So thank you for doing that. Before we go, can you tell the audience how to find you if they wanted to work with you? Where could they follow you? How do they connect?
Okay, so I think one resource that your audience might find quite helpful would be on my website. It's markellakaplani.com. Markella is with double L. Kaplani.com/video series. And this is a free mini course, you could say, that you receive in your email. And it talks about matrescence and
Mhm.
how it affects. And it's broken down into small sections so that it's easy. We're all very busy as mothers. So that it talks about how we change as mothers in work, how we show up in work, how matrescence affects us in the relationship, how it affects us in our spiritual world, and how do we reconcile all of this. There are actionable steps, and maybe it's something that what I've heard as I ask for feedback is that it really helps frame things in a different
Yeah.
light to really understand all the things that are happening and that validating and how normal it is and how to navigate
Mhm.
these challenges that come up and these
Amazing. I'll make sure.
contradictions.
Yeah. Oh,
And then, sorry, I'm also on Instagram, markella.kaplani. These are the two best ways to connect with me, the website and Instagram.
awesome. I
Oh,
think that resource would
sorry.
be
And I
really
do have
valuable.
the podcast. I forgot about my podcast because I'm launching it this Sunday.
Awesome.
So
Amazing.
it's the Parenthood and Relationship Podcast. The trailer is launching this coming Sunday. And that's where I'll be talking about the changing relationships. So, how do we reconnect
Mhm.
to ourselves? How do we reconnect to our partners? And how do we reconnect with our children?
Amazing. I wish you all the success with that podcast because
Thank you.
I know that it's going to be valuable and I know that it's already very needed. Markella, before you are able to go, we have the question of the hour. And that question is, in the Minding Mind community, we're all about being intuitive, being instinctual, and silencing anything that is not aligned with your very essence, right? That's minding your business. How do you think minding yours, learning to connect with you and releasing everyone else's expectations, how does that impact the legacy that you will leave?
I think that for me, when I'm able to do that, because it's not easy
Mhm.
to shut everything out. I feel that it helps me and then those around me understand myself better. So for me, it becomes a very self-reflective, introspective process. I really believe in the power of being self-aware and looking deep within constantly. Constantly, there's so much to find out. You'll never stop finding out new things about yourself. And so maybe our core doesn't change too much, but we are ever changing and we can discover, just like you'll read a book when you're 20 and then you'll read it at 25, and there are different things that you will get from one time to the next. In that same way, I believe that when you mind yours and you look within and you keep on looking within without fear for the darkness that you'll see along
Mhm.
with the light, I think that you are able to reflect that onto the world. And that has a ripple effect, I believe, in the people around you so that they do the same as well.
Yeah, I totally agree that your journey is very deeply personal, but you just standing in your own essence and being yourself is literally dropping seeds and giving people permission to do the same so that you can live life without judgment of yourself and they can continue to grow and evolve without judgment either. And knowing that your comfort in yourself is safety for them as well. So I love that idea. Markella, thank you so much for joining us today. And everyone, thank you for joining both of us and listening in to another episode of Minding Mine. If this episode resonated with you, please make sure to comment, rate, and review the podcast. Your feedback helps me grow. And until next time, I want you to go live your life on your terms, and please mind your business. We'll catch you in the next episode.